is talking about a big worldwide conflict between the United Nations, the Bill Gates Foundation, and Africa, which is the continent of the future, all based on birth rates. The West has given in to the suicide tablet of Margaret Sanger. Talk about Margaret Sanger quite a bit in the book. And now the West is dead set on making sure that Africa doesn't reach its demographic destiny. Africa has 5 children per woman. The West has 1.5 children per woman, which is below replacement rate, which is 2.1. And so, thus we've got this big struggle. I don't know if the depopulators just hate humanity in general. That's probably part of it. Or if they particularly are worried about Africa being the continent of the future because of certain, deeply held prejudices that, of course, we always get accused of, but maybe that's another case of the pot calling the kettle black.
My suspicion is that they may have wanted to target certain areas first because certain areas might have proposed the most resistance. And then later on, the areas like Africa could be targeted in a more focused way.
That could be. So Bill Gates is basically the antagonist. Structure, you got character and plot, and rising stakes and internet connection. Okay, and so for the third section of the book, the protagonist is Ethiopia, and the antagonist is Bill Gates, and so let's get into some specifics.
Yes. I'm gonna pull your book out here. I'm trying to find it.
Oh yeah, pull it out.
And,
show it to everybody. I got one over here. I can show you one right here. Boom.
I can never find my books when I'm on stream because people
there
talk
you go.
about it and then I can't find it. Yeah, and because I remember the Gates section in the book.
You can Google Dean Arnold and my books come up right away. You can Google Unknown Empire.
And of course, I'll have a link before this for everybody where they can go directly to get that.
Thank you.
I do recommend it. And also you can listen to the interview that Dean and I did a few months ago on the book. So
let's start with the meeting that Bill Gates had in 2009 in Manhattan, where he called together the richest people in the world, 10, 15 oligarch philanthropists, quote unquote, billionaires, multi-billionaires. And they discussed what should we consider to be the top threat to the world, that the biggest problem that we need to solve. And according to the London Times, which reported the event.
This is the one that Oprah went to, by the way?
Yeah. Oprah was one. Bill Gates, George Soros, Ted Turner, Warren Buffett, the usual suspects. And each took 15 minutes to sort of make their presentation. And the Sunday Times said that ultimately all the multi-billionaires decided that the biggest problem, they took their cue from Gates, from his presentation, that the biggest problem was overpopulation, particularly in Africa. So this is what all the richest people in the world decided in 2009 was going to be the agenda for the next several decades. Now, an interesting quote from the Chronicle of Philanthropy about this meeting says, taking their cue from Gates, they agreed the overpopulation was the priority. And then this one staffer said, we only learned about it afterwards. Her name was Stacy Palmer. She said, normally these people are happy to talk about their good causes, but this is different. Maybe because they don't want to be seen as a global cabal. And that was from the Chronicle of Philanthropy. So that's kind of a red herring.
Yeah.
Right after this meeting, Warren Buffett gave $31 billion to the Gates Foundation to kind of.
Well, the cabal language is ironic because in David Rockefeller's memoirs, he says, I have no qualms with saying that I'm part of a cabal to establish these things.
So David Rockefeller is willing to call himself a cabal. They're alluded to as a cabal.
Right.
So let's talk about some of the people in the meeting, and then we'll get to Bill Gates's background. So Ted Turner's in the meeting, and Ted Turner is famous for a few things, but among them is his famous quote in Audubon magazine, where he said, we've got too many people on the planet. and we need to get down from several billion down to 250 or 350 million. That's an Audubon magazine. By the way, you can find all these quotes that we're going to be talking about tonight are all completely documented and available in my book. Now, I'm going to wager that 95% of these cool quotes that we're going to quote, you've quoted in the past, because I've heard you quote them several times here and there. But this is a place where they're all gathered together, and you can see all the documentation. And so that's one of the things I'm providing.
Okay.
I don't pretend to be the first to have shared some of these things, but they're all gathered together in the same place. So that's Ted Turner's quote. He's got to get things down to 250 million people. How's he going to do that? You have to ask him. George Soros is in the group. We don't have to really talk about him. He's a known depopulator. And then I got some more quotes, stuff that you quoted before. Jacques Cousteau, he wasn't in the meeting, but he's a UN guy. And he was quoted in the United Nations publication saying that it's difficult to say this, but we're going to have to reduce the population by 250,000 people a day in order to reach our goal. Another famous quote is Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth's husband, in a introduction.
Welcome to guess.
In a.
She says, "What do you mean? Welcome to guess." I wouldn't mind coming back as a virus. Yeah.
Exactly. So, in the foreword to a friend's book, he said, "If I come back reincarnated, I'd like to come back as a deadly virus to reduce the large."
Have you seen the video clip interviews where he talks about it too?
I have not seen that.
Yeah, there's 2 video clips where he says it as well in interviews.
And then another quote that I know you've quoted because I've listened to your Bertrand Russell lectures. But Bertrand Russell, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature and one of the most famous atheists, and in bed with
logician, right?
Yeah, in bed with all the population people. This is his quote. "I do not at all pretend that birth control is the only way in which population can be kept from increasing. War so far has had no great effect on this increase. Perhaps a bacteriological war may prove more effective.
Right.
If a Black Death could be spread throughout the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. The state of affairs might be somewhat unpleasant, but what of it? Really high-minded people are indifferent to suffering, especially that of other people's." Yeah, so these are some crazy people. And then in this particular section, after I quote some of those folks, I also mention that Plato talks about this in the Republic, and I know you know about this because you've got your 12 lectures on the Republic. But let me just quote those. Plato said that the oligarchs have to aim to preserve the average of population. And they will have to consider things such as the effect of wars and diseases, and as far as possible to prevent the state from becoming either too large or too small. And then he goes into some language that might be considered conspiratorial. He says, now these groups, these goings on must be a secret, which the rulers only know, or there will be a further danger of our herd breaking out into a rebellion. So this has been around for a long time. And so basically the leaders of our world financially are sort of almost openly plotting to depopulate the planet.
Yes. That's, one of the talks I did in the Global Elite series was on the 10 commandments of globalism. And that was one of the top commandments because it's one of the ones you can't compromise on. There's no global elite writer of the last century who doesn't believe in some form of depopulation. It's one of the dogmas that must be accepted, along with, of course, Darwinism and all the other things like that. But yeah, so this is dogma number 1. This is part of the billionaires' confession. Their Nicene Creed includes point number 1. Listen to, we believe in one God, the Father Almighty, Bill Gates, Darwin, Soros, Rockefeller, the evil quadrinity. But yes.
As we get going, we might be able to identify a name that they possibly invoke when they do their secret creed.
Yes.
So Yeah. So let's talk about the final person in that 2009 meeting, which is Bill Gates himself, and just a little bit about his background. Some people may know some of these tidbits, some may not. First of all, he's not a middle class or upper middle class kid who was just a smart kid who figured out how to do software and computers and that sort of thing. He was born a multimillionaire. He was a trust fund baby. And he went to the sixth ranked high school in the nation that had a tuition 3 times more expensive than Harvard's. This is all in Seattle. His great grandfather on his mother's side, J.W. Maxwell, founded the First Bank of Seattle in 1906 and was a member of the Federal Reserve.
So Federal Reserve banking background. Wow.
Right. And then his mother was on the board of United Way with the CEO of IBM. And so there was a relationship there that allowed him to pull off this crazy software deal with IBM that made him a multi-billionaire. On his father's side, his father goes by William Gates Sr., but his actual name is William Gates III. But he legally changed his name to William Henry Gates Jr. We don't know why. We're not sure what he was trying to hide, or maybe just the elitism. But in fact, himself is actually Gates IV. So he is a multi-generational elitist